My friend Rosa died in a prank I helped plan. She climbed into a suitcase, we zipped her inside, and then we forgot about her for 9 days. But that's not actually why I'm writing this. I'm writing this because my husband Wade was at that same party. And when I mentioned Rosa's lingerie on the news story, he reacted like he already knew. Wade never opened the suitcase. Wade never moved it. Wade never saw inside it. So how did he know what she was wearing when she died? Hey guys, welcome back. 3 stories tonight from r/no sleep. Let's get into it. Story 1. The worst deaths, in her opinion, are accidental. She read last week about a mother who rolled onto her newborn and suffocated it. Every year toddlers die from being left in hot cars. And then you hear stories of kids playing games, like one boy who hid in an unplugged freezer and suffocated to death during hide and seek. Can you imagine being the person responsible in any of these situations? To her, this is so much more terrifying than the prospect of the paranormal. She'd much rather be haunted by a ghost than by guilt over unintentionally hurting someone. Her husband Wade is the opposite, unbothered by accidents, but petrified of horror movies about demons or vengeful ghosts. She told him none of those things are real, so why be scared? He counters that accidents are without malice, therefore not as scary as murderous ghosts that might be real. She guesses he has a point, about the lack of malice anyway, not about ghosts that might be real. She knows they're not real, because if they were, her best friend would definitely be haunting her. Rosa got into the suitcase on her own. Lakeisha and she helped her. They were all drunk, giggling. Rosa was supposed to surprise Bolin. She had a huge crush on him. Let her back up. They were in a party. Their friend group had been together for years. They rented out this lodge. Her husband Wade, who back then was just her crush, his buddies Bolin and Tucker and JB, and the girls who were her besties, Lakeisha and Rosa and Kay. There were also some other friends who stopped by, and Rosa was in her flirty phase. Rosa was her best friend, but she wasn't perfect. She was like a butterfly who sips from every flower, a real heartbreaker, beautiful and passionate. Whoever she was with fell hard, like she was the love of their life, but she never committed. On again, off again with JB, then seduced Wade, which was kind of awful because she knew she had a crush on him. She'd even flirted with bisexuality with Kay. Now her eyes were on Bolin. She forgets whose idea it was for Rosa to hide in the suitcase. Lakeisha said something like, Bolin's suitcase is big enough to hide a body, and that's when Rosa decided she'd hide in it, and spice up the prank by wearing lingerie. When Bolin took the suitcase up to his room and opened it, he'd find a sexy surprise. They were stupid, stupid, stupid. None of them had good judgment, especially since they were tipsy. Once Rosa squeezed inside, whining about her hair getting caught in the zipper, Lakeisha and she went to go badger the boys to bring everyone's bags to their rooms. Later, Kay told her she was sober and to go make sure Rosa wasn't stuck in there, so she went to check if the suitcase was still at the bottom of the stairs. At least, she thinks she did, but she was drunk. While all of them were sitting outside watching fireworks later, she noticed Bolin missing. Since he hadn't come back, Lakeisha and she assumed Rosa was in there with him, that her lingerie stunt had worked. In the morning, when Bolin came down, Lakeisha asked where Rosa was. He was clueless. What about his suitcase? Hadn't he opened it? He said someone had shoved all his clothes into the closet in a pile. He wasn't sure why. He assumed he was being pranked or something and hadn't seen his suitcase. So you never opened it? Asked Lakeisha. Dread bloomed. Oh God. Lakeisha was telling him how they'd taken his clothes out and Rosa had hidden inside, hoping to surprise him in her lingerie. Bolin blushed and said he was gay. His coming out to them hardly registered. Because where was Rosa? None of them knew. She went downstairs to the basement. There was the suitcase, still tucked away at the bottom of the stairs, exactly where they'd left it when they zipped Rosa inside the night before. Nobody wanted to open the suitcase. The boys argued about who had left it there. JB said he'd lifted it, but noticed how heavy it was and asked someone else to take it. Each of them had thought another of the guys was going to grab it. She is ashamed to say she went outside when Lakeisha reached for the zipper. Wade came out and joined her, as they heard the gasps and whispers of, "Oh God." His fingers gripped hers tightly, and she put her head in her hands and sobbed. Rosa had suffocated, but it had taken a long time. The police wondered why none of them had heard her gasping for help. Kay sheepishly told them about the fireworks, a prank gone wrong, authorities ruled. Her friends said then, and still say now, that ultimately, Rosa was the one most responsible for her own misfortune, that she'd made her own decisions, that all of them were a little guilty, but none of them was wholly responsible for a tragic accident. But it was her hand that closed the zipper. She has lain in bed thinking about Rosa gasping for air. Why didn't she scream? Why didn't they hear any muffled shouts? She imagines Rosa squeezed into the darkness while her pleas for help go unanswered, and she can't breathe. But the real reason she's writing this is because this morning she saw a story in the news about a woman in her underwear found strangled on the beach. Her husband switched away from the reporting. When she asked why, he said he thought it might trigger her. Why? She asked. It wasn't a prank. I thought it might remind you of Rosa, you know, the lingerie. She supposes that aspect was similar. To be honest, that part of the tragedy had never really stuck with her as much. But now she thinks about how they all stopped talking about Rosa afterward, how her death was only a blip in the news, no details were released. In their friend group, Rosa's death became a taboo subject, almost like she'd never been with them at all. They all silently agreed to forget her, but the more she thinks of that report on the news, the more she's getting that feeling from that day. That top of the stairs feeling, like she's looking down and seeing something she doesn't want to see. That oh god, oh god, oh god sense of impending dread, and she's about to be sick, because Wade dated her too, and loved her, and she's more and more certain she looked down the stairs before the fireworks, and there was no suitcase there, and now she's wondering, if Wade never saw what was in the suitcase, never picked it up or opened it or moved it, how did he know she was in her lingerie when she died? Alright, take a breath after that one. That one ends with a question that just sits there, won't let you go. This next one starts in an office, a remote job. A co-worker named James who always kept his camera off, until one day he didn't, and what was sitting on his shoulders was something that should not exist. Story 2. James and he both started working at Keystone Data Analytics in 2019, right before the pandemic. They were pretty good friends. Every Friday they went out for drinks with a few of the other software engineers, but like most tech companies, Keystone went fully remote in 2020, and James and he lost touch. James always kept his camera off in meetings. For 4 years he didn't see his face. Then one morning, James turned his camera on by mistake. What he saw was so horrible he'll never forget it. Does anyone have any blocks? Aisha asked during their morning stand-up. The time series graphs don't look right, James said. I think there's something going on with the date logs. He was the one who'd written the logging code, so he told James he'd look into it. Keystone develops data analytics platforms for government organizations. They'd recently signed a $1 billion contract to build a new platform for a CIA research project. Everything about the project was very hush-hush. They were all forced to obtain security clearance. James was the only exception. He had all kinds of authorizations that the rest of them didn't have. When the rest of them were forced to return to the office, he was the only one allowed to stay fully remote. After looking through his code, he thought he'd found the problem. He fixed it and then messaged James and asked him to look at the time series graphs again. James said they still didn't look right. Can I call you? Sure. He started a video chat, expecting like usual James to join with his camera off. Instead, his face filled the screen. He looked skeletal. His eyes were completely white, and a tiny deformed man with a hooked nose and beady black eyes sat on his shoulders, pulling his hair. James's screen went black. Thanks for looking into this, Cameron, he said as if nothing had happened. He barely heard what James said. He was still in shock, frozen. He walked over to his team leader Aisha's cubicle. She sipped her tea and then looked over at him. I just got off a call with James. He didn't look well. You actually saw him? There was someone else in the room with him. He was sitting on James's shoulders, pulling on his hair. James looked like he hadn't eaten for weeks. Aisha and he made plans to go to James's apartment together after work. They buzzed his apartment. He agreed to come downstairs. He looked even worse in person than he had on camera. Pale and thin, his neck covered with bruises. What happened to your neck? My nephew loves to jump on my shoulders. Could I use your phone for a second? He quickly typed a short message and then gave the phone back. Call my uncle. Chimera 3 is loose. They both felt uneasy. They decided to try to track down his uncle's number at work the next day. At midnight, his laptop blew up with hundreds of messages, all from James. "I need to talk to you," over and over. He called him. James's pale, skeletal face appeared, eyes completely white, that strange man sitting on his shoulders, riding him like a horse. "You need to mind your own business. If you bother us again, you'll regret it." The strange man mouthed the words. James spoke them. He ended the call. The next morning he found the number for James's uncle. He left a message. At 5 that evening, a middle-aged man with a buzz cut stood on the steps to his apartment building. Roger, James's uncle. They sat on a bench in the park across the street. "You need to tell me everything you've seen." Roger had parked nearby. He drove them to James's apartment. He buzzed again. He convinced James to come downstairs. Roger stepped out of the shadows. James, startled, started to back away. Roger said something quickly and quietly that he couldn't hear. James froze, then very slowly turned and walked back upstairs. Roger followed. He went and knocked on James's door. "It's Cameron. I just want to talk for a minute. Leave me alone. Why can't you just tell me what's going on?" Suddenly, James's door swung open. James grabbed his arm and pulled him inside. For a second, that tiny deformed man's beady eyes pressed against his. A horrible ringing filled his ears. Pressure built inside his skull until his brain felt like it would explode. The tiny man ran into the bedroom and jumped through the window, down the fire escape. "Get back here, Kevin!" Roger yelled. He ran to the bedroom window, but decided not to chase after him. Roger came back to James. He knelt and checked his pulse. His face turned pale. "He's dead." During the car ride home, Roger explained what he could. "Kevin is a weapon that escaped from us, a parasitic empath. He has the ability to latch onto people, read through their minds, influence their behaviours. Who knows how long he was attached to James? To drain his mind like that, he must have been attached for years." He shook his head. "The next few days you need to be very careful. Kevin will be looking for a new host." The next morning, Aisha was out sick. He tried to catch up on work. Near the end of the day, he started to feel strange, sort of lightheaded, but there was pressure inside his head too. He went to bed early. The next morning, Aisha was back to run the stand-up, but she was working from home and kept her camera off the whole meeting. That evening, he boiled some ramen. Then his vision doubled. Something inside his skull pressed out against his eyes. He blinked. He was on the couch, the bowl of ramen half empty. 30 minutes had passed since he'd been in the kitchen. A voice whispered in his ears, "Come outside, Cameron." He walked to the living room window and looked down at the park. Aisha stood in the light of one of the street lamps. Kevin sat on her shoulders, waving at him. He shut the blinds, ran to his bedroom, hid in his closet, called Roger. "Kevin's here. He's outside my building." He held his phone in his shaking hands. Finally, a text message from Roger. 2 minutes out. Stay calm." He tried to write back, then his vision widened. The carpet pulled upward into his eyes. White static. When the static faded, he stood in the park, next to the empty playground. Above him, the stars shone in the night sky. "It's a beautiful night, isn't it, Cameron?" Aisha/Kevin said. "So calm, so peaceful." Aisha stepped towards him, her eyes completely white. Kevin held onto her braids with one hand. The fingers of his other hand pressed inside her spine. He started to run, but his legs froze. "You can try to run, but you can't get away from me." He couldn't control his body anymore. He knelt on the ground. Kevin pulled his fingers out of Aisha's neck and jumped off her shoulders. She fell to the ground, unconscious. "Now let's get to know each other better." Kevin walked around him and grabbed a handful of his hair. Right as he began climbing onto his shoulders, a horrible screeching sound cut through his ears. Kevin fell over, screaming in pain. Roger walked towards them, holding out some kind of auditory device. "You've been very bad, Kevin. You've hurt a lot of people." Armed soldiers appeared around them. As Kevin lay on the ground, twitching in pain, they cuffed him and dragged him into the back of a van. Roger put his hand on his shoulder. "You got here right in time. I've been staying close to you. You're a lot like James. I had the feeling Chimera 3 would like you." Aisha and he were brought to a military base. Doctors ran a series of tests on their brains. They said he seemed fine, though they weren't quite sure about it. Back at work, the CIA managed the cover-up. The story they gave Keystone was that James had left for another job and Aisha was away on sick leave. He went along with the story. For the next few days he had a bad headache, but then his head started to feel better. The only problem was that every now and then time skips ahead again. He loses 30 minutes to an hour. During the gaps, he's done things he doesn't remember doing. It's terrifying. But at least he's not alone. At least he has Aisha to talk to about all of this. She called him today to tell him she's finally out of the hospital. She's taking some time off but feeling a lot better. They're supposed to meet for coffee tomorrow. He just hopes it was really her he talked to, and not just a voice in his head. 2 down, 1 to go. That last one ended with him not sure if his own thoughts are his anymore. This final one is about something that watched over a woman's mother her entire life, keeping her safe, never letting any real harm come to her, and when her mother died, it passed to her daughter. 10 signs, 10 marks, and then finally she would see it. Her mother called it her guardian angel. It is not an angel. Story 3. Her mother died 2 months ago. It wasn't a tragedy in the sudden, shocking sense. It was a long, slow, quiet fading. Cancer. They had years to prepare, but you're never really prepared. The last week was spent in a sterile, beige-coloured hospice room that smelled of bleach and quiet finality. She sat by her bed, holding her thin, papery hand, just watching her breathe. Her mother was at peace with it. That was the strangest, most difficult part. While she was a tangled, screaming knot of grief and anticipatory loss, her mother was serene. On her last day, when her breathing was shallow and her voice was a dry, rustling whisper, she pulled her close. Her eyes, which had been cloudy and distant, were suddenly crystal clear. "Don't be sad, my love," she whispered, a faint, tired smile on her lips. "I'm not afraid. I've never been afraid. He's always been with me." "Who, Mum?" "My guardian, my protector. He was a gift from my own mother when she passed. He's kept me safe my whole life. He's never let any real harm come to me." She assumed it was the morphine talking, a final, comforting delusion. "When I go," her mother continued, "he will pass to you. He has to. He needs someone to watch over. You will be safe now, always." "Mum, don't talk like that. You won't believe me at first, but you'll know. There will be 10 marks, 10 signs after I'm gone. When you've seen the 10th, you'll know he's with you. And then you will see him." She recited the marks in a low, rhythmic chant. A coin returned, a silent bell, a path cleared, a saved fall, a warning unheard, a fear answered, a scent of the old earth, a touch of cold fur, a voice not your own, and finally, a gaze returned. She finished. A deep, peaceful sigh escaped her lips. She closed her eyes, and a few hours later, she was gone. The weeks that followed were a suffocating fog of grief and paperwork. She had completely forgotten her mother's strange final words, just the ramblings of a dying woman. Then the first mark appeared. She was at the grocery store, fumbling for her keys in the parking lot. A quarter slipped through her fingers and fell onto the dark, wet asphalt. She looked for a minute. It was gone. She drove home. When she emptied her pockets onto the dresser, there it was, sitting right in the centre of the pile. A single, dry, gleaming quarter. Her pockets had been empty. A coin returned. A week later, the second mark. She was walking home past an old decommissioned church. A single, clear, resonant bell tone rang out from the stone tower. She looked up. The tower was still. The great bell was motionless. No birds flew out. No one else in the street seemed to have noticed. A silent bell. The third mark came a few days later. A massive maintenance cart blocked the hallway at work. She turned to go the long way around. Less than 30 seconds later, she turned back. The hallway was empty. The massive cart was gone. There was no way anyone could have moved it that fast. A path cleared. She wasn't just uneasy anymore. She was starting to get scared. These were too specific, too perfectly aligned with her mother's strange prophecy. She started to feel like she was a character in a story that someone else was writing, and she started to feel like she was being watched. A constant, low-grade, prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She'd be in her apartment and feel a sudden, intense pressure, as if someone had just walked into the room. She'd spin around, her heart pounding, but there was never anyone there. She started seeing things too. flickers of movement at the very edge of her vision, a shadow in a doorway that was a little too tall, a little too dark. When she'd turn to look, it would be gone. Mark number 4 happened a week later. She was walking down the stairs to her apartment lobby. She missed a step and pitched forward, the sickening, weightless lurch, the flash of the hard tile floor rushing up to meet her. She braced for the impact, for the crack of bone. It never came. She just stopped, a foot from the ground, suspended in midair for a split second, as if an invisible, powerful hand had caught her by the chest. Then she was set down gently on her feet, a saved fall. The 5th and 6th marks came in quick succession. She was about to get on an elevator at a shopping mall. A sudden, inexplicable wave of pure dread. A silent internal scream telling her, "Do not get in." She let the doors close without her. A moment later, the lights on the floor indicator went dark. A grinding screech echoed down the elevator shaft, a warning unheard. That same evening, a large barking dog came bounding towards her in the park, off its leash, teeth bared, a foot away, ready to leap. It suddenly stopped, let out a high-pitched, terrified yelp, tucked its tail between its legs and fled. As if it had seen something standing right behind her, a fear answered. She was 6 marks in, and her life was no longer her own. She was being guided, protected, manipulated by an unseen, unknowable force. She began to see it more clearly, though never directly. In the reflection of her dark TV screen, she'd see a shape standing in the room behind her. Tall, stooped like an old man, arms too long, hands almost touching the floor. In the reflection of a shop window as she walked by, a dark, hulking shape following a few paces behind her, always keeping to the shadows. The 7th and 8th marks brought it closer, a heavy, musky animal scent that came and went without reason. Damp, rich earth and something like wet fur, a scent of the old earth. One night, lying in bed, she felt something brush against her outstretched hand, coarse and bristly, like touching a thick, wiry animal pelt. She snatched her hand back with a choked cry. She was alone in the room. There was nothing there. A touch of cold fur. She was 9 marks in. The terror was a constant companion now. She knew the 10th mark was coming. The 9th mark came last night. She had finally managed to fall into a fitful, exhausted sleep. She was woken by a voice, a low, guttural, wet sound, whispered directly into her ear. Not a language she knew, but she felt the meaning of the sound in her bones. It was a word that meant, mine. A voice not your own. She spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner of her living room, clutching a baseball bat. Watching the shadows, waiting for the dawn. Tonight she knew it would end. She sat on her couch, the TV off, all the lights in her apartment blazing. The feeling of the presence in the room was overwhelming, a physical pressure, a thickness in the air. The musky animal scent was overpowering. She could feel it, just there, in the dark hallway that led to her bedroom, waiting. She doesn't know what came over her. Maybe it was a year of grief. Maybe it was weeks of mounting terror. But she was done being scared. She needed to see it. She needed to face it. "Okay," she said, her voice a shaking, defiant whisper to the empty air. "I know you're here. Show yourself." The air in the hallway seemed to shimmer, to darken. A shape began to resolve itself out of the gloom. At first, the familiar stooped silhouette of an old man, tall, maybe 7 feet even with its hunched posture. Arms long, gnarled, 3-jointed fingers brushing against the floorboards. Its body covered in thick, matted, greasy black fur. And then it lifted its head, and she saw its face. It wasn't a man's face. It was the long, narrow, bearded head of a goat. Its horns were thick and curved, spiraling back from its narrow skull. But the worst part, the part that finally completely broke her mind, was its eyes. They weren't the dumb, placid eyes of a farm animal. They were a pair of intelligent, ancient, and utterly malevolent yellow eyes. The pupils horizontal slits, like a serpent's, and they were looking directly at her. A gaze returned, the 10th mark, the final sign, her mother's guardian angel. She didn't scream. The sound was trapped in her throat, a solid, immovable ball of pure terror. They just stared at each other for an eternity across the 20 feet of her brightly lit living room, and in its ancient yellow eyes she saw it, the same serene, peaceful, knowing look her mother had on her face when she died. It is her protector, her guardian. It has been with her, a silent, unseen shadow for the past 2 months. It cleared the path for her. It saved her from the fall. It frightened away the dog. And now that she has seen it, it no longer feels the need to hide. She is writing this now from her desk. The sun has come up, but it has brought no comfort, because it's still here, standing in the corner of the room by the door. Its stooped, hairy form, a black hole in the morning light. It hasn't moved, it just watches. Her mother's final words echo in her head. I've never been afraid, he's always been with me. What does she do? How do you escape a guardian angel? How do you run from a protector that will never, ever let any harm come to you, but whose very presence is a fate worse than death? And that is where we leave it tonight. 3 stories. A woman who realized her husband knew something about her best friend's death that he should have had no way of knowing. A co-worker with something sitting on his shoulders, pulling his hair, and a parasitic creature that went looking for a new host the moment he was gone. And a guardian that watched over a mother her entire life, that now stands in the corner of her daughter's room, in the morning light, and will not leave. Drop a comment telling me which one got to you the most. I read every single one. See you in the next one.